What would you do if the moment you trusted most turned into the deepest betrayal? Coco Jones, a young mother cradling her newborn in her arms, walked into the hospital expecting care, comfort, and safety. Instead, in the blink of an eye, the unthinkable happened. A nurse's hand struck her across the face while she was still holding her baby. The room froze, her heart raced, and the shock left everyone speechless. But what no one in that hospital knew was that in just minutes, their entire world was about to change. Coco Jones had just experienced the most life-changing moment of her life. After hours of labor, she held her newborn baby girl for the first time. The hospital room was filled with the steady beeping of machines, the faint smell of disinfectant, and the soft cries of her child. Coco's eyes glistened with tears of joy as she whispered promises of love and protection to her daughter. It should have been a moment of peace, a moment of healing, but almost immediately she began to notice the unsettling way the hospital staff behaved around her. The nurses exchanged quick glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Their smiles were thin, their voices cold, and their tone carried a weight of dismissal. When Coco asked for a blanket for her baby, the nurse sighed heavily, as if the request was a burden. When she pressed the call button for water, she was left waiting far longer than any new mother should. Instead of warmth, Coco felt a wall of indifference around her. At first, she tried to brush it off, convincing herself that maybe they were just tired, maybe the night shift was difficult, but the small details piled up quickly. The way a doctor addressed her without making eye contact, the subtle smirk from a nurse as she adjusted Coco's IV, the feeling that every request, no matter how simple, was being judged. It was as if they were daring her to complain. Deep down, Coco felt something was wrong. She could sense it in the air, in the silence that lingered too long, in the curt answers she received. This was not how a new mother should be treated, and she couldn't shake the growing fear that what she had already seen was only the beginning. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of Coco's newborn breathing against her chest. She held her baby with the tenderness of a new mother, her heart full, but her body still weak from labor. The sterile smell of the hospital mixed with the faint scent of baby lotion, a moment that should have been filled only with peace. But the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. A nurse walked in, her expression sharp and dismissive. Instead of warmth, her eyes carried irritation. She looked at Coco as if she were a burden. Her tone clipped when she spoke. "You need to keep the baby quiet. Other patients don't need to hear this crying." The words struck hard, especially because Coco's child had barely whimpered. Coco's lips parted slightly in disbelief, but she held her composure, rocking her baby gently, refusing to let anger rise. The nurse didn't stop there. She moved roughly around the room, checking equipment with unnecessary force, muttering comments under her breath. Some people always think they deserve special treatment. Her voice was just loud enough for Coco to hear. Coco tightened her grip on her baby, her jaw clenched. She could feel the weight of eyes from the hallway, another nurse passing by, glancing in, smirking before walking away. No one stepped in. No one defended her. It became clearer with every second that this wasn't simple rudeness. It was targeted, deliberate. Coco felt the sting of humiliation. A woman who had just given life, now being treated like she didn't matter. Her baby squirmed lightly in her arms, as if sensing her distress, and she whispered a soft lullaby to keep him calm. Her voice shook, but she held on to her dignity, refusing to let them see her break. The nurse leaned closer, her face inches away, and hissed, "People like you should be grateful you're even in this hospital." The cruelty in her tone cut deep, and the silence that followed from the other staff was deafening. It was as though the walls themselves had chosen to turn against Coco. She sat there, heart pounding, trying to stay calm for the sake of her child, but the fire inside her was starting to burn. What the nurse didn't realize was simple. Coco Jones was not the kind of woman you could break, and the nurse had no idea who she had just crossed. The room was already tense, but no one could have imagined what came next. In a flash of arrogance and cruelty, the nurse suddenly raised her hand and struck Coco across the face. The sharp sound echoed through the ward, and for a moment, the entire room froze. Coco staggered back a half step, clutching her newborn tighter against her chest. The baby's soft whimper instantly turned into a piercing cry, the kind that cuts into the heart of anyone listening. Coco's instincts took over. Her arms curled protectively around her child, shielding the baby from the world, even as her own cheek burned with pain. The staff who had been laughing earlier suddenly went silent. Shock filled the air like static, thick and unbearable. Patients in nearby beds turned their heads, eyes wide with disbelief. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of humanity, the nurse stood tall, her expression cold, as if what she had just done was nothing more than routine. The arrogance in her posture screamed louder than her slap ever could. Coco's eyes welled with tears, but not from weakness. They were tears of rage, of betrayal, of a mother forced to swallow her pain while her newborn screamed in terror. Every heartbeat seemed louder, pounding in her ears as she steadied her breathing. She wanted to scream, but she knew her baby needed her calm, her strength. The hospital, a place meant for healing and safety, had just turned into a battlefield of cruelty and injustice. Whispers began to spread among the other patients, some horrified, some too afraid to speak. A heavy silence pressed down on everyone, broken only by the cries of the infant. But the nurse had no idea the storm she had just unleashed. She didn't know who she was dealing with, or the power standing right in front of her. Because what happened in the next 10 minutes would turn the entire hospital upside down. The slap still burned on her cheek, but Coco's eyes no longer carried just pain. They carried fire. She looked down at her newborn, his tiny cries echoing through the cold hospital walls, and something inside her shifted. She was no longer just a vulnerable mother holding her baby. She was Coco Jones, the woman who had risen through storms, who had fought for every inch of respect she had. And now no one in this hospital would forget it. She carefully placed her baby in the arms of a trusted family member who had rushed in after hearing the commotion. Then she straightened her back, wiped her tears, and pulled out her phone. The nurses who had mocked her only minutes ago now froze as they saw her fingers move quickly across the screen. She wasn't calling a friend. She wasn't calling family. She was calling people whose very names could silence an entire institution. The first call went through, her voice calm but sharp. "This is Coco Jones. I need you here immediately. A violation has taken place at County General." On the other end, the reaction was instant. High-ranking officials who had worked with Coco on public health campaigns, administrators who knew her influence, even media contacts who owed her favors. Suddenly, alarms began to ring outside the hospital without a single siren turned on. Inside, staff started whispering. "Did she say Coco Jones?" a young intern muttered, his eyes wide. A doctor who had been standing silently in the corner stepped forward, now visibly nervous. He had recognized the name, and more importantly, the weight it carried. This wasn't just a patient. This was someone whose voice could bring cameras, lawyers, and government oversight crashing down on them within hours. But Coco wasn't finished. She made a second call, this time louder, her words echoing down the hall. "I want the director of this hospital here now. And if he's not here in 15 minutes, this entire institution will answer in court and on the evening news." Every nurse who had laughed, every staff member who had turned their back now began to panic. The one who had slapped her suddenly looked pale. her hands trembling as she fumbled with paperwork, as if pretending to work would erase what had just happened. But nothing could erase it now. The power dynamic had flipped, and they all knew it. In less than 10 minutes, footsteps thundered in the hallway. Senior doctors, administrators, and even security began rushing in. Their faces carried the same expression: fear. The kind of fear that only comes when you realize you have messed with the wrong person. And then the microhook that kept every heart in the room racing. None of them had yet realized the most powerful call Coco made was still unanswered. Someone was on their way, someone whose arrival would shake the hospital to its core. The hospital descended into chaos the moment Coco demanded accountability. Her voice, steady but filled with fire, echoed through the hallways as she stood holding her baby close. Administrators rushed in, their faces pale as they realized what had just unfolded. The staff who had dared to humiliate her moments earlier now stood frozen, their arrogance replaced by pure fear. Coco did not waste time. She called higher authorities, her connections stretching far beyond the walls of that building. Within minutes, hospital directors and senior officials arrived, summoned by her command. The atmosphere shifted drastically. What was once a place of dismissal and disrespect became a courtroom where justice was about to be served. The nurse who had slapped her trembled as Coco calmly described every detail of the assault. Security was ordered to escort the woman out of the ward immediately. Other staff who had mocked, ignored, or enabled the abuse were also called out by name. They stuttered, tried to excuse themselves, but Coco's unwavering gaze silenced them all. She was no longer the vulnerable mother. They were the ones cornered. Administrators tried to offer apologies, but Coco wasn't accepting empty words. She demanded written reports, official suspensions, and immediate disciplinary actions. Each staff member involved felt the crushing weight of consequences fall on them in real time. Some cried, others pleaded, but the verdict was clear. Their actions had no place in a hospital meant to heal. News of the incident spread quickly through the building. Doctors and patients peeked from behind doors, shocked that the same staff who once strutted with power were now being marched out in disgrace. The hospital board, alerted by Coco's direct call, sent representatives who made it clear firings would follow, licenses would be reviewed, and no one would escape accountability. The tables had turned completely. The same corridors where Coco once stood humiliated now echoed with justice. Her baby, safe in her arms, seemed almost symbolic, a reminder that no one could trample over her dignity without consequences. The hospital, shaken to its core, would never forget the day they crossed Coco Jones. Every eye in the building was fixed on her, not with arrogance or dismissal, but with respect and fear. Justice had been served, and the weight of her power left a mark on everyone who witnessed it. Coco held her baby close, gently rocking them as the chaos of the hospital finally settled. Her voice was soft, steady, and full of love as she whispered that no matter what happened, she would always stand between her child and the cruelty of the world. The fear and humiliation she had felt moments earlier had transformed into an unshakable strength. Everyone in that hospital had witnessed not only her pain, but also her resilience, the kind of power only a mother can summon when her child is threatened. As she looked around, she saw the shame on the faces of those who had doubted her, the regret in the eyes of those who had stood silent. It was a reminder that respect and justice are not optional. They are the foundation of humanity. A mother's love is unbreakable, and when disrespected, it becomes a force capable of shaking walls and changing hearts. The lesson was clear. Strength is not measured by position or authority, but by the courage to protect what truly matters. And that day, an entire hospital learned a lesson it would never forget.